So a direct impact warhead is quite rare for anti-aircraft missile type systems, and wouldn't leave the kind of fragmentation patterns that we've observed on the wreckage that we've seen so far. The other common type of anti-aircraft warhead, apart from sort of straightforward HE fragmentation type, which is consistent with what we've observed here, is something called a continuous rod warhead, which sends out effectively an expanding ring of metal fragments, which leaves a much more localized but severe sort of cut through various critical components, and that isn't consistent with what we've seen in the wreckage so far. So it seems to be a high explosive fragmentation round, which again is fully consistent with an SA-11 system. The missile is fairly universally acknowledged to be an SA-11 BUK medium to heavy surface to air missile system. Looks a bit like a tank with 4 large missiles on the top. And it's a radar-operated heavy system. It's much larger than anything we've seen until about the beginning of last week in separatist hands. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians, their armed forces operate this same system. So there have been accusations from the separatists and the Russians that the Ukrainians were responsible, which we've discounted as an option because, of course, the separatists don't operate any aircraft. So the Ukrainians haven't fired any surface-to-air missiles at all during this conflict, and they have no reason to deploy them. Some have suggested they may have thought this was a Russian intruder, but again, we've discounted this because the last thing the Ukrainian armed forces want to do is shoot down a Russian aircraft, because it would be a fantastic pretext for Russian armed intervention. So they'll be being very careful not to provoke the Russians. The SA-11 is a semi-active radar homing anti-aircraft missile. It's launched from a tracked launcher, and the vehicle itself establishes a radar lock, which is initially used to launch the missile. Then once it gets closer to the target, the missile switches over to active radar mode with its own seeker, and that guides it in the terminal phase. At that point, once it's within close proximity, several meters of the aircraft, a high explosive fragmentation warhead will be triggered, which will send shrapnel into various critical parts of the aircraft, causing it to, in this case, disintegrate. Systems as heavy as the SA-11 are not common at all among non-state actors. This is one of the first instances we've seen of this sort of weapons proliferation. The man-portable shoulder launch systems, which are spread throughout particularly Iraq, Syria and Ukraine at the moment, are much more common as non-state actor anti-aircraft armament, but are not capable of reaching the aircraft at the altitude it was at in this case. So this is a great significant escalation in terms of the firepower of the rebels, but it's fully consistent with the damage we've observed, and it's also consistent with the shoot down of a Ukrainian AN-26 transport on Monday, which was also at high altitude. So all signs continue to point to this SA-11 system.